Hello, good afternoon, welcome back. It's so exciting how many new opportunities have been created now that COVID level 1 is here, and so many companies have had to reinvent themselves and innovate. And you're probably sitting saying, well, I've got all of these new potential opportunities. Even we have recently been offered the opportunity to sell and distribute a product for someone, and we've sat down with them, and now we're in the honeymoon period, and we're all excited because we're talking about what we're going to do, what he's going to do, what he's going to offer us, what the profits are going to be. But what is going to happen going forward, and how do I now make sure that our relationship is one that's going to be sustainable, it's going to be fair, it's going to be complementary. You might remember I spoke before in one of my previous videos about the network business environment. So we have this wonderful opportunity to network with this business and be able to service a client with great products, and it complements the other things that we're doing. But how do we protect him, and how do we protect ourselves and make sure that that relationship remains fair? And for this, I'm now sitting and saying, what contract do we need to put together? And wow, that's been something I've been doing for decades in various environments and various businesses. And I just wanted to share with you the importance of having contracts that bind us, that protect us, but that also set the rules. It's like going into a marriage, isn't it? That you're saying, well, here's your obligations, here's my obligations, here's our benefits, and this is how we solve problems. So just very quickly, if I can, just talk about the structures that you potentially want to have in your agreement. You want to make sure that you've got an introduction that explains a little bit of the background of the relationship and what the two parties want to achieve together. You want to talk about the period of the agreement. If you're saying, well, I'm only getting a franchise agreement or a distribution agreement for 2 years or 1 year, put that in the agreement. When is the start date? When is the end date? Does there need to be? You could make it an evergreen agreement and just say that either party can terminate the agreement on 1 month's notice, 60 days notice, or whatever. If it's something where you've had to invest a lot of money in to set it up, maybe somebody's given you the opportunity to manufacture something for them, then you rather, if you're going to have all that capital expense, want to make sure that the term is going to cover the capital expense, that you can recover your money that you spent before the termination of the agreement. And then, what are the rights and the obligations of each party? What do I have to do? Okay, so I'm going to be selling a waterproofing product, and what's my responsibility? Do I collect from the factory, or does the factory deliver to me? Do I have to hold stock, or will they hold the stock? What is my responsibility in the distribution? What am I allowed to do and not allowed to do? All of those sort of things, you want to define that in your agreement. Whether it's actually within the agreement itself, or at the end of the agreement you have an annexure that defines each person's, maybe it's a service level agreement or it's appendix defining it, but definitely have it in there. And then the financial provisions, wow, that's often the moment, was when somebody realizes, this is not profitable to me, this is not working out, because you didn't really in the beginning say, okay, what are the financial implications for each party that is taking part in this arrangement? And yes, you want to have something where they are benefiting financially, but you also need to benefit financially at the end of the day, because when you consider all your underlying costs that you're getting into to deliver this, can you actually meet what they want from you and still make it worthwhile for your business? Don't be greedy, but just make sure that it's something that the two of you can sustain in your relationship. And then even from a point of view of, is it a commission structure? Is it a fixed expense and fixed GP and fixed selling price, etc.? And then who gets paid when. If it's commission, do you get paid when the customer pays? Or if it's a product, do I have to pay upfront and hold the stock? Can I afford to? So have all of those thoughts in your processes about your financial provisions. And then what indemnities? If I'm selling a waterproofing product and the chap is putting some funny chemical and they could make somebody's roof or house blow up, should I hold the responsibility for their roof going kaboom? No. So you need to think about now, who's going to hold the responsibilities for what? What am I going to indemnify the provider for? What are they going to indemnify me for? It's important to know where the boundaries, and if they're client indemnities like warranties or something, who carries what warranties. The other thing is then ethical behavior. In every different environment, there might be different ethical considerations. So just consider what ethical behavior boundaries there should be. And I mean, by world standards at the moment, ethical behavior has become a very big, important corporate social responsibility item. So refer to it in your agreement. What about force majeure? Big word. No, not really. What it just really means is that what would be an event or a moment that would happen that would say, if this happens, neither of us is responsible, that we cannot deliver our service or our product. And then in what circumstances would force majeure come into play? And then for how long? So if I have a force majeure, maybe my truck is in a big accident, it's beyond my control, I can't collect the materials and deliver them to the clients. Is there something in a force majeure clause that we could say, well, if that happens, then this will happen? Or could we say, if you can't deliver your services for 30 days, but then we need to show what the circumstances are that have caused this force majeure, what we've done to resolve the force majeure, and what the alternative plan is for us to deliver. Or, like for example, maybe you've got a food provider that's delivering meals to your learners. Have you defined, first of all, what the minimum standard is for the service and the meal? You don't want them charging you 50 Rand for a peanut butter sandwich. But besides that, what happens if they have a major fire in their kitchen and they're supposed to be delivering cooked meals to your learners and they can't do it? You can't have them going for a month, 3 months, 4 months, not able to deliver your services. And then what are you doing? So then you would say, okay, no, hang on, stop a minute. In this particular case, if you are unable to deliver the service for, say, 2 weeks, then we have the opportunity to go elsewhere, even if it's a temporary, or whether we would say, okay, after 30 days, it's a permanent termination of the agreement. What about RP? What's RP? Intellectual property. So if I had an instance recently where I was assisting a business unit because they had delivered a intellectual property item to a client, and the client then came along and said, no, I want you to sign these restraints and these clauses and this RP ownership agreement with me so that what you've made for me is protected. But they hadn't thought about that at the beginning of the agreement. So now it was like, oops, but we're an IT development company. Some of the code and the framework that we put in that end product for the client, that's our IP that we need to be able to use in other products that we deliver for other clients. So what is the unique IP that we're going to deliver for this client that they're paying for that will be theirs? So you need to formulate that in your agreement to say right up front, okay, so what is our intellectual property that no one else can take ownership of, even if it's included in your finished product that we're making for you, and what is your IP? So maybe the client brings you something that's already their finished intellectual property, and you're saying whatever existed in each entity before we went into this relationship remains that of each party, the ownership stays there. And then what we develop together might be part of a new joint venture, or alternatively, what we develop separately for the client becomes the client's. I mean, even like with web designers, you might say that I'm designing unique elements for a client, and that client doesn't want you to repeat those same design unique elements in somebody else's logos or layouts and that, and they're saying, hang on, those must be ours. So consider your intellectual property, and obviously you always want to make sure that if somebody comes into your business to become a service provider, you might say that any IP that they develop while they're a service provider within your organization remains in your organization, because you're paying for them, aren't you? So this for me, I've seen becoming a very explosive or emotive situation that people want to avoid. So be sure that you're covering that. And what about confidentiality? How do you deal with confidentiality? What's confidential information? Do you define what is regarded as confidential and what is regarded as already out there known in the marketplace? And then what is the person allowed to do with your confidential information? How do they handle it? What do they have to return at the end of the agreement if the relationship ends? Obviously, there's certain things about your client lists and your private techniques and processes and knowledge. You'd have a knowledge bank of unique knowledge that you use in your organization or your business. If you're in a transformation business, you might have templates and tools that you use that you don't want anyone else to know about underlying in your service provision. You certainly wouldn't want anybody, when you're a manufacturer, to know who your raw material suppliers are. So that would be confidential information, and you'd want to have a clause in your agreements to protect that sort of thing. A challenge that we've fought with often in our own business, and I've seen it in other organizations. I was working in one company and the innovation manager said, no, we don't need a non-solicitation clause with this organization. We've got a good relationship with them. And I was like, please, can we just be safe in this area, because we never know what's going to happen in the relationship in future. And they said, no, we're not going to have a non-solicitation clause. A non-solicitation clause basically says, I'm working for you, I stop working for you, I can't now go and take your staff, your suppliers, your consultants, your director, your shareholder out of your business or your environment and stop them from working with you, and now they're only working with me and they're servicing my clients, because you're now having unfair competition against you. If I've stolen your key individual person in your organization that's got that key knowledge and experience, maybe you've spent an enormous amount of time training and developing them, and now I've come along and I've stolen that person from you and moved off. Or alternatively, I've been working in your business, I leave and I now solicit your clients and take your clients away from you. So there must be that non-solicitation and non-compete agreement with you. If you and I come into this arrangement and I've got my own client base and you've got your client base, and we are now going to join our client base together, okay, stop. Let's agree what's going to happen. What do we get for joining our client base together, and who retains what? And if you've paid me for the client base, fine. But if you haven't, when I leave, can I take my client base back with me? So that whole idea of what we can or can't solicit and take away, what do we bring into the table, etc., needs to be clearly defined in your agreement. Now this is the next step. None of us wants to believe that there's ever going to be a breach or breaking of the relationship. But I've seen it, this non-solicitation clause that I'm talking about. We didn't have it in that particular agreement that I was referring to. And next thing we discovered that a key individual in that organization had been poached by the service provider that was delivering the service for us, and they had the audacity to offer us that service and steal that person that they stole from us, use that person to deliver the service. So it was very disappointing for us. So have the non-solicitation agreement, but also have a clause that says what will happen if they breach that non-solicitation. Who will pay what? How will you recover what you've lost? So maybe you're going to say, we will charge you the equivalent of 12 months of that person's salary or the lost revenue from the client if we lose the business as a result of you breaching the non-solicitation clause. So have the terms for what you would do in the case of a breach. And then maybe sometimes there isn't a breach and you just want to know what you would do if you want to terminate. So what are the arrangements and the terms and conditions for terminating the agreement? You're going to give me 30 days notice. You're going to return the IP that is common to us or that is just mine or whatever. You're going to pay me some sort of a cancellation fee if it's a termination early. Have all of those defined in your agreement. And then what's the effect of termination? Maybe, as one instance where I worked in, a gentleman he'd breached the agreement in that we had said that in his obligations he would not have unreasonable or inappropriate relationships with our employees and our learners, and he had gone ahead and unfortunately had inappropriate relationships in that he was breaching the normal relationship that you'd expect him to have for the service that he was delivering. And as a result, we felt it prudent to terminate the agreement. So now we'd have to deliver the service, continue to deliver the service to the client, but fill the gap that is caused by the breach of this relationship. So then in that instance, we say, okay, well, the effect of termination is that you will do a handover to a new service provider. You will hand all of the relevant reports to us. You will give us an indication of where you were at. Maybe somebody was building code for you, and the effect of termination, you would say, you will hand over the code, you will do a handover to the client. We will make sure that the client understands in what the product is going to do or what the user interface needs to be, so that there isn't a sudden cut off, I'm gone out the building, and then you've got this huge hole in finishing your service or finishing your contract. So it's also quite important to understand what is the effect of termination. If I'm no longer your distributor, I can no longer use your logos, I can no longer use your email addresses, your telephone numbers, etc., etc. I can no longer contact your clients. So define that. A lot of agreements sometimes are helped if below the agreement you have a service level agreement. So you're defining what are the escalations, who are the contact people in your organization, who are the contact people in my organization. What are the various processes that we use for, say, for example, taking delivery or doing distribution, or in my service level agreement, we've defined what the rules of engagement are. We've defined the terms and the payments, etc., etc. But what are my key performance areas? And what are the tasks and responsibilities that I, as your service provider, would be expected to be giving you? And what would you be expected to give me? And then are there various standards or reports, and define those? What documents do I need to provide you? What documents do you need to provide me so that we can deliver the service? So that's often helpful to have that in a service level agreement. What would happen if the service breaks down? What's the escalation process, etc. And then it's sometimes useful to have annexures that you might attach examples. The meal provider is an example. Maybe they attach a menu that says these are the minimum standards of food that you will provide. And maybe as an annexure they need to provide their certificate of authority to make meals, because the regulation, I think it's 138, says that if you're going to be a meal provider or make food, you need to have a certified kitchen, etc. So is that in place? And so annexures to agreements are also quite important. So I hope that I've been able to help you. I think it's a very, very important topic. And don't forget, we all think, oh, you know, it's fantastic. We've got this brilliant opportunity and we run ahead. And can I tell you how many times as the risk and compliance person in a group of companies, or as the finance and operations director in another organization, these things landed back on my desk and we're trying to close the door after the horse has bolted. Often it doesn't work. Sometimes we can save it. I've seen where agreements are completely silent on a situation and now the client is saying, who's paying for this? This wasn't completed properly, or this hasn't happened like we expected it. Who's paying for this? You might find that you are reliant on a third party or something the government does or doesn't do, and you have been silent on that in your agreement to say, listen, we're indemnified. If the CETA doesn't approve this, it's out of our hands. You can't hold us responsible. If the government changes rules in this area, these clauses become null and void. Does that mean the whole agreement becomes null and void? Doesn't have to. You could say that they are divisible from the rest of the agreement and the rest of the agreement continues. But please make sure that you're protecting yourself with agreements. It just sets a good place to be, to have that mutual relationship, understanding the rules of engagement, the boundaries, and being fair to one another. It mustn't be a one-sided agreement because it won't be sustainable, because somebody's going to have a sense of injustice. And unfortunately, often what happens, agreements get written, they get tossed in the bottom drawer and people don't remember what was agreed to. So bear in mind what's in your agreements and enforce them. Not rudely and arrogantly, but expect each other to respect each other, and your relationship will be sustainable. So enjoy those new opportunities. I wish you all the best. Stay well, stay safe, and be blessed.